Welcome everyone to Authors on Their Books. I'm Jan Fishler, your host, and today I'm going to be interviewing Christy Byrne Yates, whose book is called Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. So welcome, Christy.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you, Jan.
I'm excited to have you because I knew you when this book was just a little idea and you were just starting to work on it.
That's
And
right.
the other thing was I'd been through the sandwich generation myself and didn't even know what it was called or that it was called anything. So
Right.
boy, do people need this book. That's all I can say. I wish I'd had it when.
Yeah, me too. I absolutely. And I'll tell you, the sandwich generation, people are like, well, what's that? But it's not a term I coined. It was coined by a social worker back in the early 1980s who was working with women in their late 30s, early 40s who were really struggling. And the social worker kind of found out, okay, the common thing here is that they're raising kids, but now they're also caring for aging parents or an aging grandparent, and they're just squeezed in the middle. So she called it the sandwich generation, and it kind of stuck. Now I kind of look at it as sandwich families, right? Because it could be any kind of combination. It could be grandparents. It could be your aging parents. It could even be someone who you're raising children. Somebody under the age of 18 is living in your house and depending on you, and then another generation is depending on you, or another adult is depending on you. So there's a lot of different ways we could build our sandwich, and you're just getting that person in the middle is kind of getting squeezed out at times.
Well, I know in my case, I didn't, you don't plan on these things either. I mean, in your case,
Wow.
in your book, your parents had dementia. In
Hmm.
my case, I had a mom who suddenly became ill with something mysterious that they never really did know, but
Wow.
she didn't last very long.
Wow.
And I'm in California and they're in the Midwest, and I'm
Right.
flying back and forth. And I've got one kid in junior high, and the other
Yeah.
one is, I think, a freshman in high school. And
Yeah.
my husband's working, and I used to work then too. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, it was like, oh my God, you put everything on hold.
Yes.
And the next thing I know, I'm begging and borrowing air miles from people.
Absolutely.
It was,
Absolutely. And I think that long distance caregiving is really hard. And have you ever seen those things on? I am definitely from the baby boomer generation, and I remember, variety shows where they'd have somebody who was spinning plates, remember? And
oh
they'd have
yeah,
poles and they're spinning plates, and then
exactly.
inevitably some plate would drop, right? And
Yeah.
that's how I felt like, oh my gosh, if there's another plate I have to spin, they're all gonna fall, right? But and this thing about trading miles with people, absolutely, I hear that all the time. It's a lot of
I
work.
also remember telling my son, who was in junior high school at the time, if you need a mom, I'm not really here anymore. So these are my friends that you can call. They'll give you rides,
Yeah,
they'll give you money, they'll
absolutely.
help you out, but
Yeah.
it was horrible. It was,
Well, it's really horrible, and yet I will say that's probably you probably felt horrible as a parent at times, and maybe your son was like, "Arr." But you know what? In the long run, that's actually a gift, right? Your son learned how to trust other adults to build a resiliency that maybe had you been doing everything for him, he wouldn't have had to figure out different things. And so there's lots of ways we can look at this, and it's true. Building your team, that's what I call what you did is what I would recommend anyone do, and that's find your team, your village, because it's hard to do it all yourself, and you get pulled in lots of different directions at the drop of a hat, right? So whether your parents are, living with you or nearby or far away, you might have to drop what you're doing to manage something. You got to get on a call. You got to call three different places to get through to somebody at the insurance company. I mean,
mhm.
it's all kinds of things. So, yeah.
Well, I was rereading your book, in preparation for this interview, and I was looking at your table of contents, and I thought, if I had only had that checklist, just
Yeah.
if just the table of contents had been a checklist, forget about all the good content, it would have
Right.
helped me so much. Like the
Oh, yeah.
conversation, never had one. Having these discussions, it was like
Hmm.
my dad, when he was alone, he didn't want to talk about it. He
Right.
he got a cancer diagnosis, and they said, put your affairs in order. And my dad goes, well, I'm not ready to die. I'm not going to do all that. I go, you have to.
Yeah. Super hard. And thank you. I'm glad to know that even I hadn't thought about that way, but absolutely. It's like thinking about it now, right? The table of contents is just kind of a to-do list of things you might want to think about that you hadn't already thought about, because this isn't something we think about.
No.
We're busy raising our kids, having a great time, enjoying them. And then, and some of us are really having the benefit of having our parents be really lively and involved grandparents who might do things with our kids at times, or free babysitting, all kinds of things. And then suddenly they start needing us, and it becomes more and more and more.
Yeah. Well, I love when you talk about, think like a case manager. And I think the fact that you were one,
right.
in addition to being a psychologist and working in the schools, to me, that was so good to go, oh, be really organized,
Yeah. Well, and in that chapter, I talk about, that was my orientation, was case management. But I also think there's a case for whatever you do and whatever your skill set is that you know how to do really well, use that and adapt it to your circumstance, right? So you're a writer, you know how to tell stories, you know how to maybe build a case for something, and so that might be how you start those conversations, is thinking about story and how you do that and how you craft something, a beginning, a middle, and end, all these things. Listen, if you're an accountant, you think about how you're going to put together a spreadsheet to show what's going on. But we all have skill sets, and rather than learn something all new, because who of us has time to become a physician or a gerontologist? Well, nobody, right? We don't. But we use what we know. If you're a baker, you've got to assemble your stuff and put it together and create. Whatever you do, you've got a model, and use that model that's your go-to skill set to be able to manage the chaos, because that's what's happening is you're in the midst of chaos and you want to have some control, at least an illusion of control. So go to the skill set that you have and adapt that. So that's really a great way to think about it, I think.
I know in my case, my dad, I had a year where I had to deal with hospice. And when it started, because I wasn't always there, I was going back and forth, a week here, 2 weeks there. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And but I had to learn how to really be clear about what I needed. And I know you talk about self-care, but I knew I could be with my dad. I could help him. I needed one thing. I needed to be able to go for a walk for an hour every day and be outside. And my dad and I had an agreement. If he couldn't get up and take care of himself, he wanted someone else to be there. As long as he could use the bathroom, take a shower, he was fine. And when we got to that point and hospice didn't have a room for him, I had to make some calls, and say, I'm sorry, I need help here. I can't do this. And that was something I learned. Just keep asking. I was like a broken record over and over and over.
Absolutely. And there are more and more things. There are a lot of agencies that provide adult daycare, that provide really meaningful time periods for people for that may have any kind of situation, or just be older and need help walking or whatever. But sitting in front of a TV all day isn't a great way to find meaning in life. So, people are getting engaged in these activities. And some of those agencies also then provide respite care and some other kinds of services. But you know what, Jan? I didn't know about any of these things either. I didn't know about them. And so until I needed to, and then I started figuring it out. So I wrote the book because I thought maybe I can give a heads up to folks and think about it.
Right. And I'm thinking people need to read this book before they ever even, if you have parents and you have kids, you should read this book, because
yes.
I told my daughter I was interviewing you today, and I'm the grandma, and I have a 18-month-old granddaughter. And I said to my daughter, as soon as the interview is over, I'm giving you this book, and just put it in your pile and read it, because at some point it's going to fall on you.
Yeah. And then the other element that I like to bring into this conversation is that Because I'm a child advocate. I was 20 years in the school system, and prior to that, worked in many different levels of mental health uh, program development. But my last 20 years, I worked as a school psychologist, and so I worked with kids all the time and about learning. And here's the thing I know about kids, well, humans, but especially kids, they are learning all the time. Even when you're not trying to teach them something, they're learning. They're learning by watching you, they're learning by listening to you. And they're not necessarily listening to what you say to do, they're looking at what you do, right? So I became aware of how I needed to interact with my parents so that my kids could see compassion, could see caregiving in a way that was loving instead of, me being irritated that my parents were, driving me a little crazy from time to time. And when my kids finally said to me, "Mom, you need to be nicer to grandma," I was like, oh my God, bing, bing, bing. There we go. I've got to think about what I'm teaching them as young adults. They were in high school, and I, if nothing else, I needed to train them how to treat me someday if we get to
Good
that point,
point.
right?
That's a great point.
So,
Yeah, well, I know we've only allotted about 15 minutes, so
mhm.
we've got a few minutes left. What's the heart and soul that you really want to pass on to people?
I think that point about our children, that our children are always learning, and that when we talk about the sandwich generation or sandwich families, a lot of caregiving support that's out there is really talking to people about what to do for their aging parent, or their parent that has dementia, or their parent that has, a life-threatening illness, or is just older and starting to look. We all know how this ends, right? There is no surprise here. We're all going to end up dying. So we have to start having those conversations about that and make it really a normal part of life that we talk about. But my biggest takeaway for folks is just don't forget that your kids are in this with you, right? And so how do you approach this as a whole family? By having loving conversations. Your kids know something's up. You're also probably going through your own grief process. So how do you take care of yourself in that grief process so that you can show up joyfully for your kids for those times that they need that from you too? But it's a whole family conversation, and it can be really hard, but it's real life, and it doesn't have to be damaging. It can be something where it's just one of those whole life learning lessons. And so how do we put a different flip on that so that we're not always running away from it and trying to protect. So
Great.
yeah.
Well, buy the book. Where do we get it, Christy?
Oh, Amazon, and it's available as an ebook, as a paperback, and I recorded it on Audible because I know if you are a caregiver, you do not have time to read a book, but you can listen to a podcast or an audiobook when you're taking that walk. So there you go.
Okay, so anyway, thank you. Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation by Christy Byrne Yates, Master in Psychology. Honestly, you have to read this book.
Thank you so
Anyway,
much.
I'm Jan Fishler, and this has been Authors on Their Books. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you, Jan.
Okay, don't go away. I have a couple of questions. So
Yeah.
I want to ask another question of you.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how to intro this, but I just want to talk a little bit about your writing process.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to say, hi, this is Jan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the host of the podcast Authors on Their Books. And today I'm talking to Christy Yates, and she's the author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. Let me do this again. Okay.
I give you big name. I give you a big title. Okay.
There we go. Okay. So, hi, everyone. I'm Jan Fishler. I'm the host of Authors on Their Books, and I'm talking to Christy Yates, and she's the author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. And we just did a podcast about the book, but I really wanted to talk to Christy too about her writing process and how long it took her and how many drafts and, how many who edited, just fill me in a little bit, Christy.
Oh, absolutely. You know what, Jan, I want to give you a big plug because your workshop that I took way back, before the pandemic, right? Do you remember? We were in Nevada City. It was wonderful. It was great.
It was a great
And
location when we could all be
yeah,
together live.
that's right. But it was just a very clear introduction to how to put together an outline, and you helped me understand about the writing process. Now, I had been a writer. I had not literature, or but I wrote 25-page reports for psychology, and for I was a school psychologist, so I'm producing lots and lots of reports. But that's a different kind of writing, and I had to really shift out of that and learn about not just cranking things out, but really give some thought to it. And so some of the things I learned in your class were really pivotal to me. And part of it is just getting an outline down and thinking about how to communicate a story to folks to illustrate a point, rather than just, as a nonfiction book saying, do this, do this, do this, but really get into my feelings, thinking about how I can, really tell a story and draw a picture for what's happening and what I was feeling, so that people could relate to that. So part of my process was to write the memoir pieces first. And I just kind of thought about, I knew kind of what I wanted to talk about. I did a very rough outline in your class, and that was super helpful. And then I started with the memoir. And from there, I could say, okay, what do I want people to learn from that? What would I have wanted to know? And then I went back and I just tried to make it very simple and direct, and not overly academic, but there was enough also research that I'd done. So it wasn't just stuff I pulled out of thin air. It's like, this is real. There are studies that show us how many people are in this situation. So my process was kind of all of that, right? I think having an outline is helpful. What I'm getting better and better at is setting times every day where I write.
Yeah.
If it's an hour, and even if I don't get through the whole hour, I'm just writing. What I did is I worked with you, and then I think you actually did a developmental edit for me. So you looked at it, gave me some thoughts. I worked with a book coach who helped me then look at some other structural pieces. And finally, I worked with a line editor, somebody who did wonderful things for me.
Okay.
You know, and it was great because when I got her feedback back, I thought, oh gosh, it must really be horrible because I see so much, edits in here, And she said, no, it was great, but there's just certain things. And so I just want to make it clean and direct for you. So that was very helpful too. And
I think you
yeah,
really hit on something with, I tell everyone needs an editor. I don't care how
yeah,
good a writer you are. You need an editor
yes,
who could look at things with fresh eyes and dot the I's, cross the T's, find
yes,
those stupid little grammatical errors that, you wrote that way because that's how we talk. And
yes.
it's not perfect. It's not Chicago Manual of Style, but they know that book inside and out.
Yes. And, that's interesting because one of the things I did that, and I think you pointed this out to me, and then another editor, I was very insecure. So I had a couple different editors
Yeah,
because I was
that's
like,
good.
really, is it good? Is it good? But uh, I didn't use contractions a lot. I was just, everything sounded so formal. But
Yeah.
again, I was used to writing these like,
Formal
graduate
papers.
level papers, or
Yeah.
something that was going to be read by other psychologists or something. And
Yeah.
I needed it to be friendly and real. So, like instead of I am doing this and I do not, it's like, Christy, just write it like you'd say it. So that was important for me to
Yeah.
hear.
I love when you put your little stories in there.
Mhm.
To me, that's like, oh, I was reading some of them going, oh, I so relate to.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's really important in
Yeah.
nonfiction,
Yeah.
especially even when I teach a memoir class,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think these stories that we have, it's our life experience. And
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes people really need to hear your
Yeah.
reality and your
Right.
truth to make sense of their own.
Right.
That's what I
Right.
like. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, best of luck with the book. I hope the world gets to read it.
Me
And
too.
you know, let's get it out there, at least on social media, and share
Yeah.
it with other people.
Yeah. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Jan. I
Okay.
really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Christy.
Okay.
Keep writing.
I am. Thanks.
I know. All right.